Carly Keene. I'm with the Maryland LTAP. So David Orr is a PE and a PhD. He's currently the director and senior engineer for Cornell University Local Roads Program, the New York State LTAP Center. So you're wondering, why do we have a guy from New York talking at a roadway management conference here in the Mid-Atlantic region? It's because he was the 2018-2019 president of NLTAPA. So he has over 30 years of experience in the local highway community. He's covering the gamut from picking up deer to dealing with legislators.
Which is worse, Carly?
Oh, that's up to you. I don't know.
It depends on the weather.
Exactly.
It depends on the weather.
That's right. He has a broad range of expertise in local road engineering and knows how to tie a bow tie in the dark. As you'll see, he's currently wearing a bow tie, and it's actually got spiders on it, right? You said?
Yep. Spiders and webs. Yeah.
That's awesome. So he is a licensed professional engineer in New York State and has his PhD on local roads from Cornell University. Without further ado, I'm going to hand it over to David.
Thanks, Carly. And actually, I've actually been to, I think, at least 7 or 8 roadway management conferences going back to when they were held all over the Mid-Atlantic region. So today we're going to talk about ethics. This is a course we do here in New York State on ethical choices, but hopefully we'll have a little bit of fun with it, as long as the technology and us keep friendly with each other. You never know what happens with technology sometimes. So let's get this slide moving forward for me. Oh, it's frozen on me, Carly. It's frozen. Actually, I think it is.
David, do you need us to share our screen and present it for you?
Nah.
Okay.
Nah, we'll just do it the old-fashioned way if we have to. I always have a backup plan in place. You always got to have a backup.
Yep, that's right.
That's if you don't have that, you get yourself in trouble. So. I'll just reset real quick. It won't take very long. It's probably at my end. It's always easier to blame my end, because it probably is my end. Always. There we go. Okay. So today we're actually going to be doing a whole bunch of interactive stuff, and we're going to be using Mentimeter. If you haven't been there before, it's an interactive tool. There's lots of them out there. We're just using Mentimeter.com. You would go to that website, or you can see at the very top of the screen, www.menti.com. And the code you're going to use is 1794 42 and 1. It'll show up on the screen several times. You don't have to write it down. It'll show back up anytime we're using it, so you don't have to memorize it if you don't want to go into it right now. We're going to take advantage of the technology and hopefully have a little bit of fun with it as we go forward. Now, if you're here in New York State and you need a professional development hour for engineering, it is worth that, but you'll need to get a certificate from the folks at the RMC, and then we can get you a PDH here in New York, because it's been approved for that. I have no idea what other states are doing about that, so you'll have to check with your LTAP center for that activity. So ethics, why is ethics important? Well, there's lots of different types of ethics actually, but obviously ethics is something we all need to think about. And today we're going to talk mostly about engineering and professional ethics, but ethics is one of those weird things you can't really say what the law is. It's really more of, sometimes even a belief. There are policies, we'll talk about those some, but I really want you to think about what's your ethical policy. Now, just so you know, if you do have a question, something comes up, don't forget to put something in the chat pod. We're monitoring that to help you out there, because we want to answer your questions. At the end of the day, whether it's an ethics question or just a question about the RMC, we'd like to help you out. So why is ethics important? Well, it's essentially very important because it allows us to communicate with each other. And a lot of the things we're going to talk about today, I've shared back and forth with a colleague from the New Jersey LTAP Center, Ted Green. So good ethical feature, I'm giving him credit. So we took and shared these activities and some of the ideas back and forth as we go forward. Now, there are canons out there, there's beliefs out there from different groups, whether they're engineering groups or non-engineering groups. A couple of them that come from the American Society of Civil Engineers and the National Society of Professional Engineers. They have their canons, belief structures. And while they all have about 10 items in them, there's a few that overlap. They're so close to each other in terms of text, I can put them down and they're both the same. The key is the first thing is safety, health, and welfare. If you're an engineer or you're dealing with anything with the public, the safety, health, and the welfare of the public have to come first. That makes sense. Perform services only in the area of competence. We hosted a bridge conference last week. At one time, I designed bridges. Today, I'm not up to standards. I shouldn't be designing bridges because it's not in my area of competence. Pavements, yes. Bridges, no. Cool. Issue objective and truthful statements. Don't go out and say something that's not true. We all can understand that. Act for your employer or client as a faithful agent or trustee. Ooh, now we start getting challenging because what happens if your client says to say something you don't think is objective or truthful? Well, that's where ethics starts to get challenging, even when you've got a canon, even when you've got a set of written down items. Avoid deceptive acts and conflicts of interest, and then uphold and enhance the honor, integrity, dignity of your profession. All things we can agree on. But at the end of the day, the thing I always try to remind anybody is go back to number one. What is your number one thing you're going to make your decisions around? And that is safety, health, and welfare. And if you keep that first and foremost in your mind, you're probably going to be okay. Now, again, we're going to use Menti today. So go to menti.com and use the code 1794421, and you'll get a place to put in a chat box what you think the best ethical policies are. Okay, so just put in your word or your words of what is the best ethical policies. And we should hopefully start seeing some answers show up on the screen here. Clear, written, as a couple of people have put them in. And by the way, this is all anonymous. We're not tracking this. Honesty, yep. Honest answer, yep. Let's see what else we got. How many folks we got? We got 61. So we'll go for a couple of minutes and see what kind of answers we get. Holds people accountable. Yeah, accountability is actually a very important part of good ethical policies. You can't legislate ethics, but you do want to have a policy that holds them into account. They should be straightforward and clear. Yeah. See what else we get here. Responsive, transparency. Yep. And so you can start thinking about what a good ethical policy is. You should all have one. Does it have to be in writing? Well, as someone noted, it probably should be in writing. A written policy is something you can go back to, that everybody knows what's there. So keep that in mind. But yes, you don't want to be inconsistent. You want it to be concise. Don't get overly wordy. A straightforward, clear policy that holds people accountable is really your best policy. And the thing I haven't seen on here that I think is really important, if you can do it, and it's not always easy, and that is self-enforcing. As much as possible, you try to write your ethics policy so people have good ethics on their own. You don't have to go back to that accountability and come down with a hammer. You can hopefully self-enforce. And a well-written policy, it's actually easier to self-enforce because everybody understands it. It's clear and straightforward. Okay, so we're going to move on just for the sake of the time we've got. Once Mentimeter catches up with me, it's doing that today. This is an example of what we don't want to see. This is from Flint, Michigan. You may have heard about this. This was a statement that was put out by the Flint city government, and it said Flint water is safe to drink. And they had a thing where the mayor went on TV and drank some water and all that. And they knew it wasn't true. We shouldn't be doing things like that. It's pretty easy to know sometimes when we cross the line, but it's sometimes hard to do so. It's hard to when there's pressure placed upon you, and that's where ethics gets in play. So try to keep that in mind. How do you deal with ethics? So to deal with this, I could talk about all the policies, and we could write one, and I've seen some that are really exciting. What we decided to do instead is we developed a series of scenarios, real world items where there's multiple choices that are correct. And this all goes back to an old professor I had when I was in college named Floyd Slate. And Floyd liked to say, you need to know what you would do before the ethical incident happens. And he told all of us as undergraduates, you will have ethical dilemmas in your career. Now, of course, we're smarter than he is. He's only got, at the time, I think about 45, 50 years of experience. I've got the same hair color he does now. But the point is, we thought we knew better, but he was right. We're all going to deal with some ethical dilemmas in our lives. And so it's really good if you've thought about a few of them. What would you do? Because it is easier to deal with the ethical dilemma if you thought a little bit about it ahead of time. So what I want to do is some scenarios. And we're going to go through those scenarios and we're going to talk about them. But real world scenarios are usually more complicated. They're going to be simplistic. I understand that. But just want you to keep that in mind as we go forward. So just to illustrate and to show you how this is going to work, we'll just put up in the Menti again. There's going to be 5 choices available to you. I work for, and your choices are local government, state, consultant, contractor, vendor, and the weekend. Okay, so you get a choice here. And we'll see here. And let's see, we got 62 participants. So let's at least get half. So we'll go till we get about 30 people who've put in a code here. Getting close there. We're over 20. Okay. So as you can see, it's a split pretty much between the local government and state. A couple of consultants and a couple of people who are honest and admit that they work for the weekend. And then I see one person did put an answer in the group chat. If you can't get Menti to work, you can throw it over into the chat pod and that would add one more for the consultant. So that helps me too. And it'll be interesting. There's a couple of the scenarios I'm going to show you that I bet I get different answers depending whether you work for the state or for the local. I won't tell you what I think the answers will be ahead of time though. We'll see how that goes. Okay, so now here's an example of one where you can actually select more than one choice. Okay, just to show you how this technique works within Menti. So what swag, what items have you picked up at a conference? You remember those? We used to go to events and there were vendor booths and you'd wander around and pick things up. So what have you picked up at when you've gone to the conference? We got choices of candy, key ring, pen, coaster, recycling bag. I know there's other things. I just gave you 5 just to show you how this works. Because some of the scenarios I'm going to show you are one choice and some of them are multiple choice. So keep that in mind as we go through. Okay. And then I see one person in the waiting area, Carly. Okay, so most of you picked up a pen. Heck, I know some engineering firms that get most of their pens from conferences, but the variety of things, just again, illustrate how this works. Okay. So here we go. We're going to start with our scenarios. They're not always going to be, super complicated. They're going to be simple. And I want you to think about what you would do first. Now, this is one where you may do multiple things. You'll see the symbol that sort of illustrates multiple choices. In this case, you are at the local gym and you see a guy who's retired with the gym and he's roughhousing with a young lad. And you're a little concerned about it. In the shower, what would you do? Would you stop the roughhousing, call the cops, report the incident, walk away and say nothing, or talk to the retiree later on? And I'm going to give you the Menti choices. And again, you can select more than one. But I want you to start with the one you think is the most important, but you can do more than one. Okay. So we'll see what the answers are here. Okay, so the majority of you would report the incident. Some would stop the roughhousing. And I see some folks are not able to get Menti to work. If you want to throw an answer into the chat pod, I'll glance over and look at the chat pod when doing the answers, and I'll throw that into the pool when we're talking about the answers as well. So by far, the most of you would report the incident. Some you would go and step in and stop the roughhousing. It may depend on other scenarios, and there's certain things you might see that change that. But here's the thing I want you to think about. The Lancet, a journal out of Great Britain, which is very similar to our AMA medical journals here, did a study, and they actually figured out that 25% of people in this case would have done nothing. This is the Penn State incident, and the person in question was Mike McCreary. He did report the incident, but 25% of people who were trained to look for child abuse would have actually done nothing in this particular scenario. And that's one of the challenges with ethics. Sometimes we get into a situation and we feel like, what do we do? Acting is a decision, but not acting is a decision as well. Remember that. The null alternative is still always in our back of our minds. Doing nothing is still a choice when it comes to ethics. Okay? So now let's get into some ones that are much more typical. Every scenario you see from here on out, and I may skip a couple just to have a little bit of fun, would be real scenarios that either myself or Ted Green out of New Jersey or other colleagues that I've known would have experienced in our lives. So in this particular case, you're hitching a ride. You've got an informational meeting between the State Department of Transportation and yourself. You're working in this particular scenario for a local agency. And it's about a 50-mile drive over to where you're going to be holding the informational meeting. You're going to be talking about a project where you've got some state funding. Okay. So you and the DOT folks could drive together. So that'd be one choice. You could drive together. You could also drive separately in your own vehicles, or you could drive together but promise not to discuss the meeting in either direction. Okay. And I'll throw Menti up and we'll see what y'all think about this. Are you going to drive separately, drive together, or drive together and promise not to discuss? Okay, so most of you would drive separately. Now, again, you can throw into the chat pod why you think that's a good scenario. Why would driving separately be a good idea? I mean, most of you thought that, obviously. And while you're thinking about it, if you want, for those of you who put in drive together, why would you think that would be an okay thing to do? Because from an ethical standpoint, those two actually, there's good arguments that could be made for either of the first two. It's a better appearance to be separate. Yeah, there's that possibility that there's impropriety or that there's collusion going on, which is why I know a few folks clicked on drive together but promised not to discuss. Boy, that makes me nervous because it looks like you can't promise you're not going to discuss these things. So driving separately is what's very common. In fact, a lot of policies say we have to drive separately. But think about it from a standpoint of energy use and environmental use. Wouldn't it be better to actually drive together? And aren't there some meetings where it isn't that big a deal to ride together? So, some meetings you might need to drive separately, but some, maybe you could drive together. But realize there's disadvantages to doing so. So keep that in mind before you make a decision. But yeah, you will eliminate the doubt if you drive separately. Okay. So here's another one. You're at the back to the RMC. It's next year. We're face to face, and you've got a session you want to go and see. You've been wanting to see this session. Maybe you got Rusty Lee out of Delaware. He's going to be talking, and you really want to see that session. But standing outside also is a vendor you have been trying to meet up with for weeks. You've been playing phone tag with them, and you can't set up a meeting. So what are your choices? Well, do you attend the session and ask that vendor to reschedule and meet some other time? Do you not attend the session and go and talk with the vendor? Do you attend the session and say, hey, come on in with me and then we'll talk afterwards, or at least have him attend? Or don't talk with the vendor and don't attend. Just go ahead and do what you want to do. Okay, so again, we'll throw this into Menti and see how y'all come up with the answers here. And again, if you want to go ahead and throw into the chat pod why you're choosing a particular scenario, that's something we'll be talking about a little bit here too. So, well, I'm glad to see that we're not seeing the one that I really can't defend. Most of these you'll notice there's at least one scenario that probably we shouldn't be doing. It's a little bit on the unethical side of the house. You should at least attend the session or talk to the vendor. I can see arguments for that, but I can't see an argument for not attending the session nor talking with the vendor. So I'm glad to see that. So attending the session and asking the vendor to reschedule, yeah, that one's a pretty straightforward one. Most people could be pretty clear with that. But is there a good reason why you might talk with the vendor? I mean, I know only a few of you voted for that, but is there a reason why that actually might be the right thing to do ethically? Again, you can either throw something into the chat pod or it depends on the situation. What's the issue with the vendor? And that's the challenge with these, scenarios. They're simple. They're not real complicated. And yeah, it may be something critical. Maybe you've got something coming up next week and you really need to meet with that vendor. And that conference still gave you that opportunity to meet with that person. There was still a benefit to your locality or for the state or even for the consulting firm to meet with that vendor. You have to balance where the value is. You're being paid to go by your employer, but it might be more valuable to your employer for you to go and sit down and talk with that vendor. And yeah, obviously in an optimum world, maybe we bring everybody together and talk over lunch afterwards, but you have to look and balance those things back and forth. And by the way, I see most of you want to go see Rusty anyway, so that's a good sign. Okay. Now you're back out on the job site. You're getting some work done. The guy shows up, and he's got a whole bunch of caps in the trunk. They keep a cap in the trunk that's got the name of the company that you're working with, and he wants to give you a hat, okay, or a coffee mug or something small. Okay. So what would you do? Would you accept and keep the swag, the item? Would you refuse it? Would you ask for one for everybody on the crew, which could be a pretty large number? Or would you accept it and maybe give it away later on? So if you've got that scenario, and I know most of you have dealt with that scenario, probably in your career, what are you going to do? Most of you going to accept, refuse? This will be a fun one here. And somebody put in the chat pod, the B choice, the second choice, refuse the swag. Yeah. And that's one you can't argue it from an ethical standpoint. You can't say, well, there's ethically it's bad to refuse the swag. That one's pretty easily to defend. But why is it okay for those who accepted and kept the swag or even asked for one for the entire crew? Yeah, somebody says to collect them and give them away at Christmas. I mean, that seems to me like you're getting a gift, right? Why is that still probably okay? I say probably. Let's see what y'all come up with in the chat pod real quick. Yeah, it's the low value of the items. They're nominal value. They're a bit of marketing for the firm. You're not really getting anything. Heck, you saw the picture earlier. I'll hold up. We have little coasters that we give away. So yeah, if it's small, it's nominal value. But yeah, you could accept it up to a certain amount, and you may have a policy. But again, I'm going to talk about things I don't want you to necessarily always follow your policy, because if your policy's got a hole in it, you might want to adjust the policy. But it's important to know what your policy is. Here in New York, we have two different laws, and actually a third one if you really read it carefully, that could say you can't go above 75 for the year, above 25, or above nominal value. The key is you need to know what your own ethical line is, and you need to know your organization's policies. Because if you don't know that, you get in trouble. And what happens if they bring it a second time? or if the gift starts to get more expensive. Where's your ethical line where it's just nominal versus something valuable? Now it's a couple of days later, and maybe it's the same vendor, maybe it's a different vendor. Let's do a different vendor this time. This vendor shows up with a box of coffee and a box of donuts for the whole crew. There's at least enough coffee and donuts for the whole crew, and they're not lemons. So, they're ones people will actually want to eat. Are you going to accept the coffee and donuts? Are you going to offer to pay for the donuts, offer to split the cost for the coffee and donuts, or offer to pay but refuse them if it's rejected? So again, we'll throw up Minty and see how y'all do here. See what you think. And filling up our donut hole. Okay. So far, most of you are going to accept the coffee and donuts. Okay. One person added to that. They put A in. So, okay. So we got one more. Accepting the coffee and donuts by far is winning this particular one. Okay. And then a few other folks chose the other choices. Why, from an ethical standpoint, would it actually be unethical to reject the coffee and donuts? Is there a reason why it would actually be unethical to not accept the coffee and donuts? There'd be some waste involved. Yeah. But, if it's the first day on the job, you have to balance that. But if you're going to do that, you want to let the vendor know so they don't do it again. You don't want to waste too much. But accepting the coffee and donuts one time, again, is at that nominal value. Do you have a policy in place? And again, think of the crew. They don't have any choice in the contracts. You're feeding the crew. That old crusty professor who talked about ethics, he also talked about this. And he actually said something which I still do to this day. He says, hey, look, first day on the job, buy the coffee and donuts yourself. Show up on the job site, give it to the crew, and you and the crew leader sit down and figure out what you're really going to get done. It's been great advice to me. I've used it many a time. And then I actually would set a policy with our contracts. And I'd say, look, first day I'm buying, but after that, we're going to split. We'll pay our share, you pay your share, and we'll make it work. But we're not going to turn this into just a coffee every single day coming from the vendor, because at some point, it's more than just a nominal value. It's something starting to get a little bit more of a gift kind of thing. So balance it out, come up with your policy and be consistent. Okay. So now you show up on a job site, the bridge job, we'll say, and you notice, now in this particular case, you are not the owner of the bridge. You're not with the contractor. You're with a consulting firm, okay? So you walk onto the job site and you're just in charge of the engineering, okay? You're not a, you're not an EIT or EIC, excuse me. So you see that there's no hard hats on the job site. Now, you're going to probably do more than one thing here, but what was your first thought? Are you going to walk away? Are you going to talk to the worker? You're going to try to find the contractor or the crew leader and talk to that person? Talk to the owner, which might be a local agency or state agency, or are you going to talk to OSHA or the Department of Labor or whoever's in charge of that in your particular state? Okay, so what are you going to choose here? Quick answers this time. Okay, cool. And we got somebody else in the waiting area, Carly. So most of you are going to try talking to the contractor, and I'm really glad to see that nobody walked away. It's not easy to do. I understand that. And I see the note to add one more to talking to the contractor or the crew leader. Yeah, that's probably going to be the most successful. We know that. Talking to the worker directly, probably not going to work that often. You may want to talk to the owner, again, depending on the job. If it's one time, it's one thing, but if it's multiple times, it's another. And at some point, you may need to talk to the Department of Labor or OSHA or whoever's in charge. But yeah, who are you going to talk to? Now, obviously, if you know the job, that answer might actually change. But at some point, you have to think about what you're going to do when it comes to hard hats. Okay? And we're actually going to skip the GATA PDHs today. We're going to trench warfare. In this particular case, you're a private citizen and you're walking down the street, okay? And you see a trench that looks like this one, okay? This is my OSHA picture. I've literally spent 15 minutes going through the violations on this picture. There are tons of them. So what are you going to do when you see this? Are you going to, I'm waiting for the answers to pop up here. Or is this a typed text one? I can't remember now. Now my brain doesn't remember. Let's see if y'all have choices. I hope you do. Are y'all getting choices? Type in. You get to type in your thing this time. Okay. So are you gonna do nothing? You're gonna walk away? What are you gonna do? It's an open-ended one in this case. Call the agency, contact the owner, stop the work. Yep. You get to type in your answer. Call the agency. Yep. Find a competent person. They should have a competent person on site. Whether they actually have, they're easy to find, that's a different question. Okay. And this is a challenge. We've all seen this. We're walking down the street and we see a job that we're like, that job's unsafe. What do we do? Who do we talk to? Complaining directly may or may not work much, but you might have to call somebody. Okay. The last time this happened to me, I was in a different city, and I actually found a cop that was just off site. I explained the problem to him, and he went over, and by the time I came back a few minutes later, they had shut the job down. So again, what's the line you would draw? When would you stop something? And what are you going to do? It's not always easy. Okay. So we'll go to the next one here. So it's bridge inspection time. We inspect bridges all types of the year. So in this particular case, the picture in the lower right is an actual picture from a bridge inspection. And you can see everything is frozen over. And you're worried about scour in this particular case. So you've got scour concerns underneath that pier, that concrete there. So if it looks like this, are you going to not take any readings? Are you going to use last year's values for scour so you can at least not have to keep coming back? You're going to talk to the owner. You're going to document the frozen conditions, or you're going to issue a new flag. That's, you know, a warning that we got to be worried about this. Okay. So I'll give you the Menti choices, and let's see what we get here. And again, in this case, you get to strongly disagree or strongly agree with the choices. So don't take any readings. Do you agree or disagree? Use last year's values, agree or disagree. Call the owner, agree or disagree. Document the frozen conditions, agree or disagree, and issue a new flag. Let's see what we do here. So we're starting to get some readings in here. And most of you, almost everybody says document the frozen conditions. Yep, okay, that makes sense. Call the owner is above halfway. That makes some sense. Issue a new flag. Maybe keep the current flag in place. Probably could have been a choice. That gets a little bit trickier. May not issue a new one. You may just keep the current one if, and all that. Obviously, you can't take any readings. And that's going to be an issue. And of course, you just don't want to use last year's values. And that's the thing I'm being careful of. What's the right thing to do? In this particular case, it actually happened. They tried to use last year's values and document them as if they were new readings. The engineer who did that no longer can inspect bridges. In fact, it doesn't even have a license in our state. So what are you going to do when you come across things like this? Don't look for the simple choice. Look for the right one if you possibly can. Okay? And we'll go past the winning raffle today. Okay, so here's a challenging one that happens to all of us. We've written up a contract bid and we start opening the bids up. And we're looking at the bids. And in this particular case, one of the items in the list is the price of paint. And the price of the paint, which you expected to be in the range of, $1 to $2 a gallon, is listed as 1 penny. Are you going to accept the bid as submitted? Are you going to reject all the bids and rebid everything? Are you going to ask the contractor if this is correct? Are you going to try to negotiate a change order later on if it turns out he was mistaken in his contract choices? So again, we'll bring up the Mentimeter. You can select more than one, but let's see what happens. Okay. Now I can tell you right now, I know this particular one runs afoul of some contract rules. I understand that. I don't want you to talk about the policy, even though I know everybody should have a policy for bid errors. What would you think is the right thing to do? And yes, Rusty, I agree with you. It depends on the agency policy. We have agencies in this state that would have to accept, and then other agencies who would have to reject, depending on what the issue was. But let's see what we get here. In a perfect world, I agree with you. You would ask the contractor if this is correct and allow them to change it. Why would that actually be a bad thing from an ethical standpoint? And I see the person put in the chat to accept, but why would it be a bad ethical choice to ask the contractor if this is correct? And yes, if you do accept it, you certainly want a scope review meeting before awarding the final one. Yeah. And that should be in your policy, hopefully. If you ask the contractor if it's correct, it does give an indication of acceptance of the bid. It also might be unfair to the other bidders. Yeah, somebody got it. There we go. In that, well, how can they can adjust theirs? I mean, there's three reasons you might see a penny bid that are real common. One is somebody, they know that particular item was mislabeled in terms of quantities, and they're trying to use it to keep their bid down. Choice number two, they just made an error. Okay. Or choice three, and this is the one it's a little nefarious, and that is they're purposely putting in a number and they expect to get a change order out of it. Again, that's why it's good to have policies, but you have to balance between things. In a perfect world, we'd ask, but we can't always do that. So we have to keep that in mind. Okay. So now we've got a safety problem. We've got an intersection that's, we'd like to redo the intersection. It's got safety issues. It's got crashes galore, or at least more than it should. And so we've gone through and we figured out what we could do. We have four choices. They have the same benefit to cost ratio, including the cost of the lives involved. So we've actually done all the calculations. Okay, so it has a very similar benefit cost ratios. One choice is to just put up some new signs. It's only going to cost you about 10K. Only a few lives would be saved in this case. In the public, there's some opposition, but not a huge amount. Choice two is a traffic light. It's a lot more money. Lives saved, though, goes way up. There's actually some negative support. People are not happy about that choice. Roundabout, $500,000, a lot more lives saved, but oh man, people are showing up. They're getting ready to get their pitchforks out when you have public hearings on it. Strong opposition. What the public has been asking for is your fourth choice, which is the new bypass for $3 million. And it's 15 to 25 lives saved, and there's positive support. And yes, I know the numbers are low. They're just relatively correct, okay? So what would you choose? Would you put up new signs? Would you put up a traffic light, a roundabout, or a bypass? Again, I know it's simple, but what's your brain say on the first time through when you hear that? Roundabouts in first. Up, the bypass is taken over. It's okay. You can rank these in whatever order you want. And I see in there somebody put in there your first choice, which would be the signs. Okay. So again, in the chat pod, why would you choose the bypass? I saw that in the chat here. Why would you choose the bypass? It's the most expensive, but why would you choose the bypass? It saves the most lives. Yeah. And that's an argument that can be made. Why would you not choose the bypass at the same time? Why would you not choose the bypass? Cost. Yeah. We have to look at cost. And if you've done a proper job on your benefit cost ratios, it may actually be better to do something like a roundabout. Again, depending on how much you trust your numbers. The roundabout may be the best. What's the disadvantage to both the roundabout and the bypass? And even a little bit with the traffic light. Why would an argument be made for just putting up the signs? disruption time. Yep. And one of the things we need to think about, we don't always include it in the calculations, and that is once you put a solution in, such as a roundabout or a bypass, it's really hard to go back and see, could we have done something simpler? You've already chosen the more complicated solution. And if you could try something temporarily, you might even be able to detect and see if there's been changes made. I have an intersection near me with 6 legs. They keep talking about putting in a roundabout. But I've also talked with the safety engineer for the city, and I said, well, maybe you could try a couple of things with the light you already have just to see what happens to the patterns before we go through the effort of a roundabout. That maybe you find out, oh, a simple solution might work, might solve the problem. So I like, if I can, to use temporary or low-cost solutions to try things out. But that's the challenge when it comes to problems like this, when you get more than one choice. Okay. So now meet Mr. Hobson. I'm going to give you a Hobson's choice that we're going to deal with. This case happens to be your fuel tank. Most of us have fuel tanks in our yard. We fill up the vehicles with it. And there's a lot of records that have to go in with the tanks, above ground or below ground. Well, you're going through the records and you realize that somebody on the crew isn't doing their record keeping like they're supposed to do. They're actually not following through properly. So what are you going to do? Are you going to report that there's a violation to whoever's in charge of gas tanks in your state? Are you going to make sure the crew starts reporting properly from this point forward? Are you going to discipline that crew member who is the one most responsible? Are you going to fix the records? And when I mean fix the records, I'm not talking fixing into the future. I'm talking about fixing the ones in the past. Okay, so I'll give you the choice here. Okay, do you agree with these statements? This is one of those ones you get to vote on all 4. So you're going to report the violation, make sure the crew starts reporting properly from this point forward, discipline the crew member, or fix the records in the past. Okay. And so almost everybody says, make sure the crew starts reporting properly from this point forward. Yeah, that should be an easy one. I hope everybody would agree on that particular one. Reporting the violation and disciplining the crew member, yeah, there's quite a variety there. We'll come back to those 2 real quickly. And then fixing the records in the past, yeah, you might need to update the records, but the old records are the records. You may need to put an addendum, but you probably shouldn't just change them. You really want to make sure if they were written wrong, they were written wrong. And I would certainly not fix them without having talked to the agency in charge, because if they catch you later on fixing records, that's bad for lots of reasons, well beyond the ethical ones. There's some liability ones and some possibly criminal ones as well, depending upon your state's rules. But let's talk about disciplining the crew member and reporting the violation. We got quite a variety there. Why don't you want to discipline the crew member? I mean, it's right in the middle. Why don't you want to discipline that crew member? It's a hard one to answer, isn't it? Yeah. Maybe he didn't know. He might have been doing what he was told to do. Okay. So as a minimum, you got to talk to that person. You really need to document, make sure they were trained properly. And if they were trained properly, then you have to decide about discipline. And the challenge, of course, in a small agency, if you discipline that one person, it could cause resentment with the rest of the department. In fact, that's actually what was going on in this particular case, was the supervisor knew if he disciplined, we were going to have an issue. And then reporting the violation is a similar kind of problem in that if you report it, you could get the hammer thrown at you. What was finally decided in this particular case was, look, we're going to do both. We're going to report the violation, but we're going to make sure we do it right in the future. And we're going to put something in the person's files. We're not going to come down on them hard. We're going to come on them lightly and make sure they're trained, but make sure everybody understands. It's like throwing at a batter in baseball. You've been given your warning. Don't do it again. There was some resentment, but I think everybody understood. And interestingly enough, the Department of Environmental Conservation, because they were proactive, was pretty light. They didn't come down on them hard at all. You've got to have open communication for that to work. And I think it's important to think about sometimes you have to do more than one thing to really get the job fixed. Okay? So now you show up on a job site. There's an error in the bridge design when you show up on the job site. You know, it's deathly quiet. The contractors are making no sound. You know, and I know when you show up on a job site where they're making no sound, that's a nerve-wracking time. You see the problem. They've forgotten to put rebar between the wing wall and the abutment. You're pretty sure there should be rebar between the two, and the contractor thinks there should be. So what are you going to do? Are you going to shut the job down until the plans are changed? Are you going to make a field change? Are you going to notify the engineer? Are you going to fire the engineering firm and hire another, or let the pour proceed? Because concrete truck is on its way with concrete for that wing wall. The abutment's already been poured. Okay? So what are you going to do? Actually, no, the abutment hasn't been poured. That's right. The twos are going to be poured at once. So what are you going to do? Okay? So we'll give you the choice. There's more than one. Okay? You're going to shut the job down, make a field change, notify the engineer, fire the engineering firm, or let the pour proceed. Okay? Let's see here. Again, you get, we'll see how we do here. Notify the engineer by FAR, shut the job down is winning, field change. I'm glad to see nobody wanted to fire the engineering firm. You know, it's an honest mistake. Letting the pour proceed is probably not a good idea. Okay. Yeah, okay. We could probably either shut the job down and notify the engineer. Okay. What's the risk of making a field change? I understand it'd be nice to make a field change and then you can let the pour proceed. What's the risk of doing a field change? You've taken the responsibility. Do you really understand the design? It could be designed that they want the wing wall and that abutment to be different from each other. Okay? So taking over and making a field change should only be done if you understand the design. And if you don't make that change, which is why it's important if you are doing something, especially with structural work, it's important to have someone representing the engineering firm there when you're doing major pours, so that if something is caught, maybe you have a chance to make a proper field change and get it done correctly. Okay? This actually happened to me back in the days, long before there were cell phones. And so there was no way to contact the engineer easily. So what we did is we grabbed some forms we had for concrete anchors, and we used the concrete that was on its way to pour some concrete anchors, so we would have time to get ready for the chains. And eventually there was rebar put in there. It was just missed. It was an honest mistake that can happen to any of us. But again, what are you going to do? And you're going to do more than one thing. Okay? Let's see, we got 10 minutes. We're going to go past this one here. And we'll go to, actually, we'll go to the next one. We'll skip that one. Yep, there we go. This happens a lot, especially in the government sector. You've got that person, you all know that person. They love to call and ask for FOIL requests, Freedom of Information Act. And so you've got another request, and you know, like every other request this person makes, the chances of it having real validity are pretty much zero. You've done, you know, probably dozens from this one person. Are you going to fill the request? Are you going to try to talk to that citizen and explain? Or are you going to maybe go over to your boss and say, look, this person is calling again or emailing again or writing again, whatever your policy is for getting FOIL request, to try to not just have to spend what will be hours to get this request filled. Okay, so let's see what y'all think here. And again, not what your policy says, what would you do is what I want to know here. Okay, so most of you would fill the request. Okay, why from an ethical standpoint would that actually not be a good thing? Why, from an ethical standpoint, would that not be good to fill the request? It's time wasted. You're wasting resources. You're 99.99% sure that it's going to be just somebody hunting for something that doesn't really exist. Okay. But the agency does need to know what they're asking for, so they should be able to get the records. You've got a policy that says fill it. You can't argue against that, but it is possibly a waste of resources. Where does it become someone legitimately trying to get information that they're looking for and becomes a waste? That's really hard to say from an ethical standpoint. So you have to be careful there. You may need to fill it in anyway, but you also need to think about, are there things you could do to maybe reduce this problem into the future? At some point, you're probably going to know that. But that's the challenge when it comes to ethics. Okay. Couple more we got time for. Yep, we got time for, I think, 3 more we're going to do here. So we'll do this one. This is a fun one. You got an old trackhoe excavator, not the one that's under the ground here. One that's a little better shape, but it's old. It needs to be sold. But you have a crew member who would like to buy it from you, or you can go to auction. You could go out to bid. You may have procedures in place, but if you got an old backhoe that you want to get rid of, what would you do? Just what's your first thought? Type it in, and let's see what y'all come up with for selling surplus equipment. What are you going to do with the surplus equipment? You're going to auction it? Okay. Oh, I typed in a misspelling there. I have to change that. It's a what would you do? Oh, well. You could do a municipal bid for it to sell it to other municipalities. Yep. A lot of states have that. We have that here in New York, where you can actually sell it to other municipalities without having to go through a full auction or bid process. Yeah. You could sell it. What about that crew person who wants it? What are you going to do about him? Yeah, it's a challenge that you run into. They want it, but you've got procedures. You've got surplus procedures. You probably should follow those procedures. If you don't have surplus procedures, you probably should think about having them, because we all know you're going to have those kind of issues come up. And yes, you could let the crew leader know about the auction information. That's perfectly legit. Just make sure everybody knows, however, that says, hey, everybody has an option during this procedure, and here's the procedure that's available. Okay. So again, think about these kind of things. We got 2 more we're going to do. This is a fun one. So got a roadway. The speed limit on that particular roadway is 40 miles an hour, 40. Okay. You get done with a study, and the study says that the speed limit actually probably should have been 50 miles an hour based upon US limits or some other technique that's used by your agency or in your state. So that's what the study says. So what are you going to do? Are you going to leave the speed limit the same and explain it to the town that we're not changing it from 40? Are you going to, under pressure, lower it to 30 because that's what the town really wants? Are you going to raise the speed limit to the study of 50 miles an hour? Or are you going to revise your study's findings to make it reflect 30 miles an hour is the correct choice? And let's see what y'all come up with. Don't explain it is winning by quite a bit, which by the way, we've done this before. Not changing the speed limit usually wins this particular one. Not surprised. Why would actually that be the wrong choice? Why might you want to actually raise it to 50? I know only a few of you voted for that. But yeah, I see somebody put in no change in the chat pod. But why would actually raising it be a good ethical choice? It matches the study. Yeah. And if you've got a study and the data says 50 If you do that consistently, you're actually going to have more consistency over the entire area. And remember, that's part of the Manual of Uniform Traffic Control Devices, consistency in the data. Okay. But would you do it for 5 miles an hour? Probably not. Would you do it for 10? Now you're getting close. At some point, it probably would be, yes, I do actually want to change it to reflect the actual situation. And I'm glad nobody's wanted to change the study. That's good. We'll do one last, well, no, that was the last one. I did have my timing right today. So I just want to remind you of a few things. I've got a whole bunch more scenarios. If we had 2 hours, we could fill the whole 2 hours. But I want you to think about the things you've dealt with in your career. What are the ethical incidents you've come across? And the more you can think about them ahead of time, the better off you're going to be. Okay? Even simple problems, however, are going to have multiple answers. These were all very simplistic. I understand that. And you're going to have multiple answers in lots of cases. Don't just think about your policy, though. Think about what you would do yourself. And if you keep in mind safety, health, and welfare coming first, you're going to be fine. I generally, if I have a choice, I let that drive my choices, and I'm usually okay with that. Now, I got one last one, a little humor for you. This is actually on one of our buildings here on campus. I'm walking around the campus on a weekend, and there was a sign in the door. It said, all door stops will be removed on Monday, 2/22, for the state fire inspection on Tuesday, 2/23. Doors are not to be propped open during this time. Door stops will be returned on 2-24. You come across something like that, what are you going to do? Okay, that's the challenge in the real world. Ethics is not always a nice cut and dry. What did I do in this case? I didn't know the building manager in that building, but I knew my own. So on Monday, I talked to the building manager in our building and I said, this probably shouldn't be done this way. You might want to do a better job of explaining why. I got it. We understand the doorstop issue, but there are better ways to do that. And this is probably the one I would not have chosen by any stretch. With that, I think we're just a minute or so out from being done. I want to thank you. If you do have any other questions, you can send me an email at david.orr@cornell.edu. Up here at the New York LTAP Center. I want to thank you. And on behalf of all the LTAP centers across the country and the Roadway Management Conference, thanks for having me.
Thank you so much, David. All right, everybody.